Los Angeles is now under the watch of 2,000 National Guard troops, deployed not by state request, but by direct order from President Donald Trump. The sudden arrival of military personnel has transformed the city's atmosphere overnight, with armored vehicles and uniformed soldiers now a common sight on the streets. For many Angelenos, the presence of the National Guard is both shocking and unprecedented, marking a turning point in the city's response to civil unrest. The move comes after protests over federal immigration policies escalated into violence, igniting a fierce standoff between California and the federal government. Demonstrators, angered by recent policy changes, flooded the streets, leading to clashes with law enforcement and widespread disruption. The unrest quickly spread across multiple neighborhoods, with fires, property damage, and tense confrontations dominating the headlines. The city, already on edge, found itself at the epicenter of a national debate over immigration, civil rights, and the limits of protest. President Trump declared the intervention necessary to restore order, framing it as a mission to save the city from chaos. In a televised address, he emphasized his commitment to law and order, vowing to protect citizens and property at any cost. Critics, however, argue that the deployment is a political maneuver, designed to assert federal authority and send a message to other states considering defiance. Military vehicles and soldiers now dominate the streets, transforming daily life and fueling both fear and anger among residents. Neighborhoods that once bustled with everyday activity are now patrolled by armed troops, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and anxiety. Some residents report feeling safer, while others describe a sense of invasion and loss of community trust. Some welcome the security, but many see it as a military occupation, turning the protests into a national flashpoint. The city is deeply divided, with supporters praising the crackdown as necessary for public safety, while opponents warn of escalating tensions and the erosion of civil liberties. The deployment has sparked new protests, with demonstrators demanding the withdrawal of troops and the protection of their rights. The deployment marks a dramatic escalation in the ongoing feud between Trump's administration and California's leadership. State officials have condemned the move as federal overreach, insisting that local authorities are best equipped to handle the situation. Behind closed doors, negotiations are tense, with both sides refusing to back down. It challenges long-standing norms about the use of military force in domestic affairs and raises urgent questions about the balance of power. Legal experts warn that the precedent set here could have far-reaching consequences for future conflicts between states and the federal government. The debate over states' rights versus federal intervention is now front and center, with the nation watching closely. As the nation watches, Los Angeles has become the center of a high-stakes struggle over authority, protest, and the future of American democracy. The city's fate may well shape how similar crises are handled across the country, setting a tone for the months and years ahead. The world's eyes are on LA, waiting to see what happens next. The city stands as a stark warning of how quickly political conflict can spiral into confrontation, leaving ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire. For many, the events unfolding in Los Angeles are a reminder of the fragile balance between security and freedom, and the profound impact that political decisions can have on everyday life. The unrest began with a series of aggressive federal immigration raids in Los Angeles neighborhoods, as agents swept through residential areas in the early morning hours. Families were caught off guard, and the sudden presence of law enforcement created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty among immigrant communities. These actions sparked immediate outrage, mobilizing community activists and drawing large crowds into the streets. Local residents, many of whom had never protested before, joined together to organize demonstrations, demanding an end to what they saw as unjust and heavy-handed tactics. What started as peaceful protests with chants and signs soon shifted as tensions with law enforcement escalated. Confrontations between demonstrators and police grew more frequent, and the situation quickly spiraled into violent clashes, with riot police deployed to control the crowds. Reports of looting and fires began to dominate headlines, overshadowing the original message of the protests. Emergency responders rushed to scenes of unrest as the city grappled with a growing sense of crisis and chaos. The federal government's hardline response only intensified the situation. Officials doubled down on their enforcement tactics, refusing to reconsider their approach despite mounting criticism from local leaders and civil rights groups. When congressional Democrats attempted to visit an ICE facility and were denied entry, it signaled a total breakdown in dialogue between federal authorities and elected representatives. The move was widely seen as a rejection of oversight and transparency. Protesters felt increasingly ignored and marginalized, fueling frustration and anger. For some, this sense of being unheard led to radicalization, deepening the unrest and making compromise seem impossible. As the situation deteriorated, media coverage shifted focus from the original immigration grievances to the scenes of chaos and disorder. This allowed the administration to reframe the issue, presenting it as a matter of law and order rather than a debate over immigration policy. This narrative shift paved the way for the controversial deployment of the National Guard. Military vehicles rolled through city streets and soldiers worked alongside law enforcement, further escalating tensions and raising concerns about the militarization of the response. In the midst of the turmoil, the original cause, immigration policy, was lost in the noise. The focus shifted to a battle over control, public safety, and the right to protest, leaving immigrant rights advocates struggling to be heard. The city's turmoil became a national symbol of deepening division, reflecting the broader struggles facing the country and highlighting the urgent need for dialogue and reform. The Trump administration insists the National Guard deployment was unavoidable, describing it as a critical step to restore order in the face of escalating unrest. Officials argue that the situation had reached a tipping point where local resources were simply overwhelmed and unable to cope with the scale of the crisis. They claim that local officials had lost control, with police forces stretched thin and unable to contain the growing chaos. The images of officers struggling to maintain order only fueled calls for federal intervention. President Trump and his allies describe Los Angeles as a city on the brink, with violence and destruction threatening public safety and the very fabric of the community. The administration paints a dire picture, warning that without decisive action, the unrest could spiral even further. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned that if unrest continues, active duty Marines could be sent in next, signaling a willingness to escalate the federal response if necessary. This message was intended to deter further violence and reassure anxious residents. The administration's message is clear: order will be restored by any means necessary, and federal authority will not be challenged. The show of force is meant to send a strong signal to both protesters and the nation at large. Republicans back the move, calling it a responsible act to protect citizens and property. They argue that swift federal action is essential to prevent further loss and restore confidence in public safety. Critics are dismissed as partisan, accused of ignoring the reality on the ground and downplaying the severity of the crisis. The administration frames opposition as politically motivated rather than based on genuine concern. The White House frames this as a test of leadership, asserting federal supremacy over state objections and emphasizing the need for unity in times of national emergency. Officials stress that decisive leadership is required to navigate such turbulent moments. The deployment is presented as bold action to uphold the rule of law in a city portrayed as out of control, with federal forces stepping in to fill the void left by local authorities. For the administration, this is about decisive governance, not politics. A demonstration of strength and resolve in the face of chaos, and a promise to restore peace, no matter the cost. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has fiercely condemned the federal deployment, accusing President Trump of manufacturing a crisis for political gain. Newsom and other top Democrats argue that the National Guard's presence will only inflame tensions and worsen the situation. They insist local authorities can manage the protests and see the deployment as an act of aggression. Newsom has openly defied threats from the administration, vowing to fight what he calls unconstitutional overreach. This defiance has made Newsom a leading figure in the national resistance to Trump's presidency. While denouncing violence, he blames the escalation on Trump's divisive rhetoric and policies. Newsom positions himself as a defender of civil liberties and the rule of law against federal overreach. The standoff has become a dramatic constitutional confrontation, with neither side backing down. The conflict is now headed to court, as California sues to block the president's deployment of the National Guard. The state argues that federalizing the Guard without the governor's consent violates state sovereignty and the Constitution. The Trump administration cites federal law allowing such action in cases of insurrection, claiming the violence in Los Angeles meets that threshold. The legal battle will hinge on whether the situation justifies overriding the governor's authority. The Posse Comitatus Act, which limits military involvement in domestic law enforcement, is also at the heart of the dispute. Critics warn that using federalized troops for policing sets a dangerous precedent. The courts must now decide if the president can unilaterally deploy state forces over local objections. The outcome could redefine the balance of power between Washington and the states for years to come. The National Guard deployment has sparked accusations that President Trump is exploiting the crisis for political gain. Governor Newsom and allies claim the administration is using the unrest to distract from other issues and rally its base. Some allege that pro-Trump groups may be stoking violence to justify federal intervention. Republicans reject these claims, insisting the deployment is a necessary response to real threats. The debate has fueled fears of creeping authoritarianism, with critics warning that using the military against domestic dissent erodes democratic norms. Supporters argue it's about restoring order, not consolidating power. The situation has become a national referendum on the limits of presidential authority. On the ground, the presence of armed troops has transformed life in Los Angeles. Some residents welcome the Guard as a shield against chaos, while others see them as an occupying force. For many, the deployment feels like an escalation, deepening distrust and anger toward the federal government. Tense standoffs between protesters and soldiers are now routine, with each side viewing the other as a threat. The Guard's mission to restore order is challenged by citizens who see their presence as the cause of unrest. Soldiers are caught in the middle, tasked with enforcing order in a city on edge. Los Angeles is left holding its breath, uncertain whether peace or further conflict lies ahead. The National Guard's deployment has exposed the deep divisions in American society. For critics, it's an abuse of power and a threat to democracy. For supporters, it's a necessary step to restore order. The crisis has become a flashpoint for debates over immigration, protest rights, and federal versus state power. Each side is entrenched, with little room for compromise or understanding. The events in Los Angeles reflect a nation struggling with its identity and the limits of government authority. As legal and political battles continue, the city remains a symbol of national discord. The outcome will set precedents for how America responds to civil unrest in the future. The country is left to grapple with the consequences of a confrontation that has revealed just how divided it has become.